All right, we're going to be getting into the Cold War next. The Cold War is a political era. It's an era in which the Soviet Union and the United States are going to be basically battling over who's greater, battling over a battle over supremacy, where they have very different ideologies. It happens right after the world gets plunged right into this. Uh, I don't even want to call it a conflict because these two never directly fought each other. I mean, they fought over, in different parts of the world. They fought against each other. They used, different. They were called like proxy wars, where they were fighting each other indirectly, as opposed to just, it's not like the United States ever invaded the Soviet Union or vice versa. But they fought, against each other in like Korea with Korean War, Vietnam. Either they're fighting against the weapons that they gave those people or whatever. But they never actually had direct uh, conflict with each other, which is good because we're going to talk about how nuclear weapons are going to become really abundant, and it's going to get really scary. So, good thing that they never actually fought with each other. So, Cold War, once again, is an era of political tension. You have to know what that is, in which the United States and the Soviet Union competed for world influence without actual armed conflict. All right. And so that's a vocab term. Once again, you're going to have to know. All right, that's what it was, where the United States, immediately after World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union get plunged into this era of political tension. And so there's no rest. There's no break for the world. Satellite states, we're going to talk about this too, when well, I'll talk about it in a minute. But it's countries that depended upon the Soviet Union. And then the arms race, the United States and Soviet Union built up their armies and weapons, especially their nuclear weapons. Some of the stuff got cut off, but uh, arms race is when each side was racing to build up their militaries, to build more weapons, to build more powerful weapons, to build more powerful nukes, to build more powerful defense systems. Whose country is better? Well, look at how many bombs we have. Look how powerful this bomb is. Look at what this is. And so these two countries are going to compete in everything, and they're going to build up their militaries, fearing each other. The United States and Soviet Union emerged from World War II as the world's two superpowers. All right, and so because the Soviet Union, they defeated the Germans from the east, the United States and Britain, they came from the west, and they collapsed in on Germany. And so with their defeat of Germany, both the United States and the Soviet Union kind of taking some credit for that. Like, hey, look at us. We're very powerful. The Soviet Union um, is gonna do some things that the United States isn't necessarily going to like, and we'll talk about that. And their differences in political beliefs and policies are soon going to pull the two superpowers apart. Because the Soviet Union has obviously beliefs in communism. The United States believes that people should be able to freely choose their government, and that's going to create tension between the two sides. Once again, the United States and the Soviet Union, even though they were on the same side in the war, that doesn't mean they were buddies. Right? They just had a common enemy in Adolf Hitler. Especially Stalin and Truman don't have a very good relationship. The president of the United States after Roosevelt dies. Um, and they, even like the atomic bomb being dropped, when the United States dropped the atomic bomb, the Soviet Union kind of viewed that as almost as a mini threat to them, like, because Truman and Stalin had such a bad relationship, like, hey, just in case you're thinking of anything, Soviet Union, look what we got. And so once again, the ideologies, once again, ideology, that's just a fancy word for belief. You are going to have to know this, what their ideologies are, what their beliefs are. The United States believes in free democratic elections. They, at the time, feared communism. The goal was to contain the spread of communism. Right? That was their whole goal, was that during this time frame that we're going to talk about, they don't want communism to spread. The Soviet Union believes in totalitarian rule, obviously. They don't like capitalism. They don't trust capitalism. That's what the United States has, where people compete. Um, and they want to spread communism around the world. And so what happened, let my screen catch up, what happened when the Soviet Union went through and they after Stalingrad, and they started reversing the losses that they had. Well, they were pushing the Germans back out of their territory. Well, as the Germans came out of their territory, what they did, as they were pushing the Germans out, they're like, oh, let's keep some troops here. Let's keep some troops here. Let's make sure we stay in Czechoslovakia. Let's stay in Poland, and they kept these areas kind of under their thumb. As they liberated them from Nazi rule, because all these countries were taken over by the Nazis. The Nazis pretty much controlled all of Europe. But instead of leaving after the war, Stalin made sure that these countries became communist. Because he didn't want, once again, he doesn't trust democracy. And so if all these countries became democratic, he feared that that would be a threat to their society once again. Hitler was an anti-communist. Usually democratic nations are anti-communist, and so he's like, well, I got to make sure my borders are secure. All right, I just got invaded by an anti-communist. I want to secure my borders, and so what he's going to do is he's going to occupy all these areas with troops, and he's going to make sure that this area right here is going to become a buffer zone. And so nobody will attack the Soviet Union like the Nazis just did. So he's going to keep those countries under his protection, under his rule, to make sure that they become communist, that they become loyal to him, and that no one will attack him and invade his country. And so he's going to make sure that that happens. Now that those are going to become the Soviet satellites. Albania will eventually get thrown in there. Um, and these Soviet satellites are going to be dependent upon the Soviet Union. Now, once again, what it does is it creates a buffer zone between themselves and the Western European countries because Stalin didn't trust them. All right, so the reason why he created those Soviet satellites, the reason why he created them was to create that buffer zone. All right, and that makes the West fearful that communism is going to spread. And their whole thinking is, they'd have meetings about this, and they're like, we think that the Eastern European countries, these liberated countries, they should be free to determine their own government. Once again, they're more democratic in their thinking. They should be free to determine their own government. And Stalin's just like, yeah, okay, I'm just going to eliminate anybody that's against us in these areas, and we'll be repressive, and we'll make sure that the communists win. But yeah, they can choose their own government as long as it's communism. And so Soviet troops, with the control of that, they made sure once again that those countries became communist. And Winston Churchill, once again, the guy that kind of saw what was going on in Nazi Germany, he's like, we got a problem here with Hitler. Before anybody else saw the problem, he's like, we got a problem with Hitler. We need to fix this. And he starts, yapping about like how we need to fix this, how we need to fix this, how we need to stop Hitler, stop giving in. Well, nobody listened to him. Well, here now he's coming out in 1946 in a speech that he's giving in the United States. He says an iron curtain is descending across the continent, basically stating that once again, just like in like World War I, where there's these rival alliances and how Europe is divided. Well, after World War II, he's saying we got ourselves a divided Europe again. Just giving you a heads up, we've got an iron curtain descending across the continent, and it is it's once again, a curtain is something that divides. All right, and it's something that is going to be an issue. And once again, that iron curtain is that red. Now, don't get this confused. This is not an actual physical curtain, because we'll talk about things like the Berlin Wall, where they actually do build a wall around the city of Berlin. And so people are like, well, if there's a Berlin Wall, there must be a real iron curtain. There's not. All right, so I just want to make sure that that's clear. It's a metaphor. All right, it's not an actual iron curtain. All right, so once again, you can see how the world is divided. You got in the blue on this side, you've got democratic nations. On the red, you've got communist nations. And so you've got these two ideologies. You got Europe right after the Second Great War. Now all of a sudden, it's like, man, are we really going to fight again? What the heck? And there's going to be problems brewing in Europe once again. And so there's a couple things that the United States is going to do, since the world kind of looks to them. These countries in blue are going to be led by the United States, because the United States is the most powerful, most prosperous, most successful democratic country. And these countries in red, these smaller countries here, these satellites are obviously going to be depending upon the Soviet Union, because obviously they're the most powerful. The USSR, the Soviet Union, is the most powerful there. And so the United States, after the USSR, the Soviet Union, has taken over those satellite nations, the United States, fearing that communism would continue to spread to these other areas, what the United States does is they sign the Truman Doctrine. Right? Obviously, Truman's the president at the time. And what that is, once again, the Truman Doctrine was created to help contain communism to Eastern Europe. Not wanting to spread. They didn't necessarily say we want to eliminate it, they just want to contain it. And so basically what it was, if any country, if any free country, what the Truman Doctrine basically stated, if any free country wants to, needs aid to fight off the spread of communism, the United States will give aid, whether it be military or financial or whatever. If you need weapons, we'll help. And so that's going to be the U.S. policy to contain communism for pretty much the entire Cold War era, that we will help. That's why we get involved into wars like Korea, in the Korean War. That's why we got involved in Vietnam, because Vietnam, they're trying to spread communism, and the United States is saying, no, we don't want that. We will help prevent the spread of communism, because we don't want communism to take over. And so that's one of the pieces of legislation that the United States signed. One of it's called the Truman Doctrine, containing the spread of communism, keeping it where it's at. Once again, fearing that if it continued this way, it would eventually make its way to America. Communism threatened the United States way of life. It was completely different, and the United States didn't want that. They wanted to have free, open trade with other countries. They wanted to have their freedoms. They felt all those things. They thought communism was a bad thing, so they were going to intervene however they can. And so, United States came in, they signed that bill, they helped out in Greece. This is when, like you see up here, Czechoslovakia is going to eventually fall to communism, that gray country. That's when the United States is like, whoop, we need to do this now. We need to help any country. Otherwise, these countries are going to keep falling into communist regimes. And so they're going to aid anyone they can. And first place that happened was in Greece, and then in Turkey as well. And then the next plan they did was called the Marshall Plan. Now, you might get these two confused, but think of I don't even know, alliteration maybe. Think of Money Marshall. Money, money, money Marshall. What that means, once again, is the United States fear, because once again, after World War II, these cities are just destroyed. Like London is in shambles. You got, Berlin, you've got, even Germany and Italy, there's all these terror bombings that took place. These cities are in shambles. And so the United States says, well, hey, if we don't help these countries, we could slip back into like some kind of a depression, because these countries aren't going to be able to build their cities back. And if they do, it's going to cost them so much money that they might become desperate, and they might turn to communism, because communism works. They think that communism could be successful, or that communism could spread to countries that have economic problems. Just like after World War I, when people lost faith in democracy, they turned to dictators because of the Great Depression. Same kind of thing. If people lose faith in capitalism, because of this, they might turn to communism. And so this economic recovery plan, known as the Marshall Plan, the fear there is that communism was going to spread in countries with economic problems. And so the Marshall Plan provided $13 billion to help rebuild war-torn Europe. Once again, it's an investment that the United States is making at future peace, thinking that if we don't do this, then these countries will fall into communism, and we'll have a bigger problem on our hand. They offered it to everybody. They offered it to the Soviet satellites. They offered it to the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union's like, no, like, we're not going to take your money. We don't need your pity. You're trying to buy allies right now is what you're doing. We don't want it, not interested. And so these countries that did partake, though, it really helped out a ton, because the United States, really, outside of Pearl Harbor, they didn't have any damage. And so they had a thriving economy at this point. They could afford to do this. And it did help buy some allies. It helped, spread the United States influence. People relied on that money. The Soviet Union did not, but the United States did gain a lot of influence from that, and it was a huge success. All right, so when you ask about the Truman Doctrine, and that's the containment policy, the Marshall Plan is the money policy. All right, and I don't want to go too much longer here. I don't want to make this like a 50-minute video. This is a big PowerPoint, so I'll break it up. But I do want to talk just briefly what happened to Germany after the war. Well, Germany, what happened after the war is that Germany is going to be divided. Germany's going to be divided into 4 zones, and Berlin is also going to be divided into 4 zones. You can see Berlin right there. And it's going to be divided into with Great Britain, France, the United States, and the Soviet Union. I have zero clue how France got any territory. They're like, hey, you guys lasted in World War II for about a week. Here, have some territory. I don't know, whatever. Good for them, I guess. But the United States, once again, split into 4 zones. Eventually, what's going to happen, you can see it says West Germany. Eventually, the United States, France, and Britain, after a little while, they're going to put their zones together and create West Germany. And then Berlin is going to be, or excuse me, the Soviet Union territory is going to become East Germany. And this is really the first major conflict between the two sides, the Berlin blockade. Because the Soviet Union didn't like the fact, once again, if you look at their territory, the Soviet Union has the Allies in their territory. They've got Western democracy in their territory, and they're like, we don't want that at all. And so in order to get them out, what they did is they said, okay, well, you know what let's do? Let's just not let them get supplies to their people. You know, because half of Berlin belongs to, more than half of Berlin belongs to the Allies. Let's starve them out. Let's block them from supplies. And so that's what they did. They set up a blockade. The United States is like, you know, hey, we're sending troops or sending trucks through. We want to get supplies. And so Union's like, nope, can't do it. That puts them in a huge bind because they're like, man, what do we do? We can't get troops, we can't get supplies to these people. What should we do? And so that's going to present them with a problem, the first real problem of the Cold War. You know, do we run the blockade? Do we risk going to war with the Soviet Union over territory in Berlin? But if we don't, if we learned anything from World War II, if we just give in to their demands and just give them Berlin, you know, what's going to happen? Well, they're going to want more because that's what Hitler did. They're going to want more, and they're going to want more, and they're going to want more. If they realize that we're weak, they'll see that weakness and they'll want more. But if we go in strong, a war might break out. All right, so we're going to talk about this in class as to what the United States decided to do with the Berlin blockade.